So Dame Uta Frith, who is a cognitive development professor out of the UK, has made some comments recently that have really divided the autism community. And I wanted to come on here and share what she has said that I agree with and what she has said that I really don't agree with. We know that those with higher support needs autism have been having a harder time getting services, both privately and in school, as well as getting medications. Pharmacies are running out of certain medications. They're having to wait years for therapies that in the past they would have access to right away. So this is why there's been a lot of pushback. So Uta, in the interview, she described two subgroups. She says there's one group that's diagnosed in early childhood that essentially you can't miss, that have intellectual and verbal delays that are significant and notable. And then there's a second group that are generally diagnosed later that don't have these significant impairments and are intellectually and verbally strong. Of course, we know it's not that clear. And that also kind of leaves out the level 2 in the middle, because there are some who really struggle in childhood or have a significant language delay and then go on to develop their language, and we find out that their IQ is actually above average and mostly present with social communication weaknesses later in life, but don't have that same profile as someone who has low support needs, who never struggled, who wasn't identified until later in life. So it gets a little fuzzy, and that's why we need to get this right. So here's where I've always fallen with this. Level 1 and level 3 autism do not have enough homogeneity, meaning that there's not enough similar about them to be called the same thing without some kind, other than levels. I think levels is still too subjective. And I think they need a different identity, a different name, because the insurance company treats them the same. At the end of the day, it all falls under autism spectrum disorder, and that's where the confusion and the frustration is coming in with treatments and interventions. And this is where it gets very confusing, because we're still working out what potential biomarkers could be for autism wherever it may fall on the spectrum. We know there are hundreds, if not thousands, of genes. We know there are all these environmental factors. We know it depends on when the child received intervention and a lot of other factors about the child's life. So going back to the level 1 and level 3, when you look at their adaptive skills, their language skills, their intellectual skills, they couldn't be more different. Going off of the statistics as a whole and just what I've seen in clinical practice, there's just such a different outcome in terms of how parents can support these children long term, what to expect, and how they should prepare their lives. Because many level 1 autistics can live independently, can hold a job, will not require 24-hour care, can toilet themselves, feed themselves, have relationships, all those things. And so the parents who have children with high support needs, these level 3 kids, need to plan. They have to get guardianship or conservatorships. They have to have special needs trust. They have to have plans for housing. They have to fight for education through age 21 or 22. They have to find diapers that are appropriate sometimes for their children as they become adults. There's all these factors that are not applicable to the, higher functioning level 1 group. So I think what Uta is kind of getting at here is, we started out with the spectrum. How can we subcategorize it so that we can individualize treatment and understand the cause? So like, for example, anxiety. Anxiety is like a general term that can mean a lot of different things, or a fear of something. But when you talk about separation anxiety, OCD, social anxiety, panic disorder, specific phobia, they all have pretty different treatments. There may be some commonalities. You would do exposure and response prevention for ERP, interoceptive exposure for panic disorder, social skill training for social phobia, and there might be different medications, benzodiazepines, SSRIs, SNRIs. So it might depend on the environmental or genetic cause of the disorder, but more so the presentation and the particular strengths and weaknesses and barriers that are in place that are preventing the child from functioning at an ideal level. All that said, here's where she really loses me. So now she goes on to describe the higher end of the spectrum, right? And she's describing those who are socially anxious, socially awkward, hypersensitive, don't like loud sounds, but they're very intelligent and very verbal. These are just personality traits. She goes on to say that if their conversation isn't stilted or abrupt, how could this be autism? And I would counter that to say, well, a lot of people compensate, a lot of people mask, we'll get to that, and a lot of people are intelligent enough to figure out the rhythms, the language, especially having social media now, the ways to communicate where it wouldn't be so apparent. Not to mention, oftentimes they're being evaluated by other people, such as myself, who have neurodivergence too. So it may not feel so odd or stilted because we recognize their intent. It doesn't feel so curious or out of left field to some of us. She also says, well, they wouldn't be able to understand sarcasm or humor. Sarcasm or humor may be abstract, like on the forefront, but once you kind of understand it, it's not that difficult to kind of generalize and extrapolate. Also, autistic people have the best humor, understanding humor in a different way that appeals to a lot of people. Then she claims that she's heard from many clinicians that they're under high pressure to diagnose people with autism because these people have been waiting so long and really believe that they have a diagnosis or feel that they've already self-diagnosed. And to that I say this: if you, as any kind of diagnostician, are giving a diagnosis because of pressure, you need to find a different profession because that is unethical. I've seen these cases and I feel for them, but if a diagnosis is not appropriate, you cannot give it because you feel badly or you want to make that client happy. She also says that the autism diagnosis is becoming glamorized and people are masking and there's no proof of that, and it's becoming so desirable to just fit in with the autism community because people want these hidden superpowers and they want to feel like they can justify their weirdness. And to that I would say, okay, but why? What is different about them? Why would they want this? Why would they seek this validation? I feel here she has missed the plot a bit. Because those people are the same people who struggle with depression and anxiety and may potentially engage in self-harm. And always, always, mental health has to trump labels.